So anyway, welcome everybody to today's lecture. We're very lucky to have Steve McDowell with us here today. Steve is a principal and design director at BNIM. BNIM. I knew I was going to do that wrong. Those acronyms are always tricky. But Steve, more importantly and more immediate to you guys, Steve and his firm is working on the redesign and really the complete reconceptualization of the library here on campus. So it's really fantastic to have him here today to talk about that project and about some of the other work of their office. Their office, I love the way they phrase their offices on their webpage. They say they have 4 offices, 1 main office and 3 incubator offices. And you guys know that I love the word incubator. So it's an interesting way to kind of describe your offices. And I'd be curious to know more about what that means. But I won't say a lot, but just learning about the work of Steve's office has been really interesting. And what you realize is that they have been at the kind of forefront of a lot of discussions that are kind of very urgent and pressing right now around sustainability and environmental issues. They've been doing this stuff for a very long time. And in fact, they probably were part of developing protocols around things like LEED and living building back in the mid to early 90s before the general industry was even talking about these things. So it's really great in that regard to have Steve here because again they were kind of at the forefront of a lot of this discussion and as many of you know and some of you are probably in the Portman studio, Georgia Tech is in the process right now of doing a living building challenge building on campus. And again, Steve's office was very much instrumental in even kind of initiating that into the United States and has actually completed at least one, if not more, of those buildings in the States. So I'll leave it at that, but I just really want to welcome Steve, you to the school and very glad you're here to talk about your work. Okay, Steve McDowell.
Can you all hear me? Good. Well, that was a nice introduction, and I think that incubator office idea is actually, it's a good word for us because I think we even think of the Kansas City office as an incubator office. But it really comes from the idea that we never set out to have any office other than Kansas City. But we have people that work in our office and decide they have to live other places, or they go work for somebody else and then decide they want to come back, I guess really those are the 2 examples. And so we have offices now in San Diego, Los Angeles, Des Moines, Washington, D.C., and Kansas City. And in all cases, the people that are leading those other offices are people that had a prior relationship with the firm. And that it's, in some respects, we morph our firm to match where our people need to be rather than the other way around. Well, it's been going on for about 10 years. Another 10 years, we'll let you know if it works or not. But so far, it works pretty good. And it actually creates a really interesting dialogue between the offices. And there's a lot of exchange of people, of work. And ideas, and constantly we're working from office to office, and it's a very probably a unique in some respects strategy, but it's one that's it's so far proven to be very positive for us as we work in 12 different countries besides the U.S. and we get about a third of those climate zones are in the U.S. So we get to experiment with a lot of climate zones, and we get to experiment with a lot of different cultures. Los Angeles has, half the world's culture in it in some respect. Oops, is that me? Maybe it's telling me to move on. But at any rate, I will move on. But that's a bit about our culture. And I should also say that we're architecture, landscape architecture, interior design, planning, graphic design, and a bunch of really smart people that help run the business. And so it's we're very multidisciplinary, and while you're not seeing our landscape team on this project. We're working with Skip Burke, who's a great landscape architect and one whose work we admire a lot. But often we work with our own, often we work with others. And so I'll go ahead and get started. And so the title, this idea of lifting spirits, and really recognizing that we work for people. We're really trying to make people's lives better through the things that we do as designers, as fabricators, as makers, as planners. And that this whole focus on people, and in some respects the switch came for me when I realized that it wasn't just about making buildings or making landscapes, that it was really working for people. Was 23 years ago when we adopted our first daughter and our first child. We only have one daughter, but in Missouri, the process is you have to get people to write letters to support, to say you're a nice person and you'd be a good parent. And one of our close friends in Montana wrote a letter and connected that architects, our primary purpose is to serve people. And quite honestly, I hadn't ever thought of it before until Terry wrote that letter. And it just, we thought we were, at that point in time, we were very much focused on saving the environment and doing all the right things for cities. But we didn't necessarily think about people as part of the environment, and we didn't think about people as being cities. It's really what cities are collections of people. And so that was 23 years ago. It was about the same time as we began working nationally on sustainability strategies and things like that, but it had a lot to do with really forming the firm. And so over time, when we won the 2011 AI National Firm Award, we created this core purpose. We thought it was time to step back and really think about what it means to be what we are as designers. We're transformers. We're helping organizations. We're helping the library become something much different than it's been in the past. Serve students and faculty much different than it has in the past. We're really helping transform things. And I'm going to share 3 more projects besides the library. And in each case, we were challenged to help create an environment that was transformative, that would allow the learning or the corporate world or whichever to progress in the way that they saw fit. We're a very close company. We're about 130. There's only about 110 in the photograph. But and as I mentioned earlier, we're very cross-discipline. We live by these values that we have developed over the years of always seeking a better way of thinking about the triple bottom line. What's good for people, what's good for ecology and nature is also good for the pocketbook. Thinking about our work being generous, and to us that means that it gives back more than it uses. It gives back more experience, more value than it uses in resources to build it in the first place or to operate it over time. We think about really being innovators, but also being replicators and understanding the place we're building in and how best to solve the unique problems of climate, the unique problems of culture, the unique problems of the organization, and do that in a way. Sometimes it's good to replicate, other times it requires or calls for innovation. We're always trying to make ourselves better and seeking excellence, and whether it's in how a space feels when you walk into it, or the technology it takes, or the way that we work with client teams like Gary Petherick and Howard in providing excellent services to the university. And we seek authenticity both in how we represent our company and our organization and ourselves, and also in the work that we do, and that it recognizes where it is, recognizes the culture. And we work for the State Department, and they hired us under a program called eco-diplomacy, which is really making campuses or making embassies and other State Department facilities overseas, making them of the place, using sustainability, using cultural sensitivity, using materials and building technologies that are are known and represent what's available, but using those things to create authentic environments that are better stewards and better citizens of the countries that they're located in. I think like every student that's in here, we all want to make a big impact. We want to make a positive impact on people's lives, on organizations, in the cities we live in, and the places we work. And then lastly, this, understanding that there's a lot of different people. There's a lot of different organizations. We live in this diverse world, and it's our job to navigate that world in a way that we are giving back through our work and honoring and respecting every person that we come in contact with. And another phrase that we use to describe this is no one knows as much as everyone, and that we really create a collaborative environment inside the office, inside the bigger team of collaborators that we work with, as well as in the sense with the builders, the craftspeople and all. Really listening to people, really understanding how we can use that, all the knowledge that's in the room to make projects better and our work better. And then also thinking about making sure that what we do is beautiful, connected to the community, gives more to the community. This is actually a proposal for our own headquarters, which is a renovation of a little old building that's not very pretty, but at any rate, it's the idea of that we're going to give back more to the community as this workplace, laboratory, park, and more. And then also we work with the Salk Institute. Came about as in a conference. We met some of the researchers there and realized that what we were trying to do with daylight and using daylight to lift people's spirits, to create better environments, is something that they were measuring, and they had developed tools. And so we've entered into this partnership that's moved around through different projects. And I know that some of the researchers have been at Georgia Tech in the last year talking to some of your faculty and maybe some of the students as well, but really understanding how we can use science to shape and inform our design and produce better results. Through our work, we've realized that really to lift people's spirits, you have to give them. We all need different kinds of places. We need places to focus. We need places to socialize, to collaborate, and they can be within different typologies of spaces. You can have those same requirements. And so, how do we create flexible environments that allow people to have the kind of space that they need to have at any point in their day or any point in their life? I don't know why I left this in, but we won awards, and I'll skip over that, more awards. But at any rate, so this is the first of 4 projects. This is a project that the mission statement that we developed at the beginning is, it's 100 years old, and it was 101 years old right now. It was 100 years old in 2015. It was a steam power plant. Then it generated steam. Some of the steam was used to directly heat the buildings around, primarily the Union Station in Kansas City. It also used some of that steam to make electricity. And that electricity was used also for those same buildings. And so the metaphor we came to was that in its old life, the raw material that came in was coal, and from that coal, the refined energy was steam and electricity. And so when we began transforming it into a place for dance and for creativity, you can probably think of the metaphor yourself, but people come in, bodies and minds, and out goes art, and out goes learning, and out goes really shaping. Most of the dancers that come here as young children and continue through high school, their career path is not dance. Their career path is science or architecture or something else. But they leave with this incredible sense of discipline, incredible sense of confidence, of knowledge of themselves that really prepares them for a life into the future. And so you can start to see the landscape of Kansas City, the old Union Station, the old powerhouse, the post office, which is now the IRS center, but it was really an important part of the city. And then today it's been transformed. You see downtown in the background, the powerhouse in the foreground, Moshe Safdie's Performing Arts Center up in the middle. And the timeline for the building, again, it was Hunt designed the building, Jarvis Hunt, I should have said. He also was the architect for Union Station. And at any rate, the building had a successful life up until 1975 when it was closed. And then there were many, we first studied it to turn it into the local brewery, but that didn't work. And so it opened in 2011 as the Center for Dance. And early on, we saw this kind of dichotomy between this heavy, dirty building that full of light, and the light was there on purpose because the people that worked there needed great light, needed ventilation, and this idea of creating a place of lifting, of ballet. And we began looking through layers of design, layers of understanding how we could take this old building and turn it into a useful tool for meeting the needs and lifting the spirits of the people that were going to be in the building. Early programmatic diagrams and just some kind of metrics on what it took to transform the building. We worked on it for 5 years, studying it and trying feasibility studies before we actually started construction. And during that time, there was a ton of deterioration. It almost killed the project as we moved forward. But it's in the kind of a more scientific approach to the dance studios are on the north side, which was the clean side where the electric generation took place. The public area is on the south side, and then the kind of interstitial space in between, circulation and support and so on. Another drawing of how we exploded it and put it back together again. The plans, which I won't go through in too many levels, but one thing that's important is in order to do this, we took a floor out and added a new floor to support the studios that are over on the top level, on level 2. So we floated that floor in. And the reason we did that is because you can see that wall has no glass. And by floating them in, we could get access to these windows along the north side, which look out over the rail yards. And we're able to give the dance, so all the dance studios have light, all have access to the city. So this important, kind of connection that the ballet school, the ballet, the home of the company is very much a part of the city and part of the community. And a section, beautiful section through the building. It's a wonderful building. Start to see some of the design ideas, and then what it looked like when we got there, what it looks like today. Pretty transformative. Let me do it again. So a lot of the steel had rusted due to flooding during that 5-year period. So today you'll see it, there's a lot of welded plates and things like that to keep it together. The pieces, the big orange hoppers at the top were where the coal came. Coal was lifted up using a conveyor belt up on top, came down through these hoppers. Each hopper had a tube connected to it to a boiler, and the boilers were located. You can start to see the glass block spaces in the floor. They were 3 levels high, providing all of that energy. What it looked like before and then afterwards. And then just some diagrams on the spaces. The dark areas are the dance studios as they stack up through the building. We use the hoppers for changing rooms, for the children's dressing rooms up on the very top level. Outside the theater and looking into the theater. This is opening weekend. Those hoppers. And then we added these stairs and really used that interstitial space, which is it's all south lit, quite beautiful space that is where parents wait for their kids or the dancers rest or take breaks between classes and so on. It looks at night. And so that takes us, the next project that I'd like to speak a few minutes about is it's a building that was made for design-led thinking. It's a business school. Henry Bloch is the benefactor, and Henry founded H&R Bloch Tax Services, if you're all familiar with that. He's been very, very generous to Kansas City. He funded a museum addition at Stephen Hall, designed at Nelson Atkins, which I know many of you are probably familiar with. It's a beautiful building. I was just in it yesterday with some other architects that were in Kansas City giving them a tour. But it's Mr. Bloch, he started 21 companies before he was successful. He was just about ready to quit because he didn't have any money. He didn't have family money. He was kind of starving. And when he finally hit it big with H&R Bloch, in fact, it was almost a mistake. He conceived the company completely differently than it turned out. And so this idea of learning from your mistakes, kind of like design, right? Kind of like design studio. But he kept trying, and this whole idea that, I think he realized that in some respects he was the designer, but he didn't know it. He was using design thinking to create these different companies. And finally, H&R Bloch was successful only because of an ad salesman at the Kansas City Star who told him how to to write an ad that would convince people to come in and buy his services. They did that, and they became instantly successful. And so he wants to teach that kind of learning from experimentation and encourage young people in business that want to be in business school or want to be in public administration school, but that at any rate he wants young people to learn like that. And so he sought a dean who passed away last year, but Tin Ki Tan, who was the head of this school when the building was built, and a huge collaborator. Tin Ki had taught design thinking in China and at University of Washington. And so the idea of making a building that was really using design thinking to encourage business school students to think differently and to learn differently was what the project became. And so I guess I was supposed to say all that on this page, but it was really creating the building to help to be designed for that new pedagogy. And it's a big part of it is Mr. Bloch has always been a huge leader and contributor to Kansas City. And so the building, it was imperative from the very beginning that the building be a community building, that it reach out to the city, that it open up to the campus, that it be a building that would draw in the community and draw in other schools from across the campus. And as soon as the building opened, there was University of Missouri, Kansas City has a 6-year medical school program. And the first 2 years, the medical students are on the main campus. Last 4 years, they're on the Hospital Hill. And so within 2 weeks, a group of second-year medical students had kind of taken over one of the classrooms at night. You know, when everybody else left, they'd go in and were using it, and they were learning differently, and it really became kind of a model for how some of the teaching that the medical school started, because they were creating collaborative learning environments. It was peer-to-peer learning, all the things that the school was about, but it was happening organically, which was quite beautiful from us. During the design process, Tin Ki Tan one day made this statement, and it was that the path of innovation is never a straight line. And what he meant by that is what he said, but also that innovation, much like Mr. Bloch learned, is always about learning from your mistakes, trying things, experimenting, and moving forward. And so this pathway is actually a dedication to different entrepreneurs in Kansas City that are from Kansas City: Walt Disney, Donald Hall, Henry Bloch. And so each one of these light fixtures is dedicated to a different entrepreneur. And it's a path that goes through a garden that's named for Mrs. Bloch, Henry's wife. And so this idea that the path of innovation goes through the garden, moves through the building, really informs the space. Oops. There's student areas. Some of the early sketches about how we were conceiving the building is, in a way, we were spiraling around this central idea of a central space in order to help open the building up to the community, open it up to the campus. So it had a north-south axis, it had an east-west axis on the middle floors. It really changed as it moved through to really support this central auditorium space. There's 2 auditoriums in the building, this amphitheater and then an enclosed auditorium as well. But it's, and then at the top are these three oculus, each one facing a little bit different direction. You can start to see this getting north light, where it's cooler, getting a little south light up here. And they each, which we wish we could take credit for that, but it's one of those things that just happens when you see those three different colors of light when you're in the space. And from old building to new, the terracotta panels, they're terracotta panels that are embedded into a precast concrete, insulated precast concrete panel, which gives us a very heavy thermal mass. It's the inside layer of the concrete is insulated, and there's a foam insulation, another layer that holds the precast, or holds the terracotta. And we couldn't afford to use a rain screen system, which is where we initially started the process. And we realized that if we did the precast system, we got this really heavy insulated thermal mass, which is less important in Atlanta than it is in a climate zone like Kansas City. But it really gives us the building that's very inexpensive to operate, to heat and cool, because it's a concrete frame, that exposed concrete on the inside, and it really creates a very high-performing building envelope and a high-performing building, a mechanical system and comfort system. And so we let the terracotta, the buildings that surround are an ancient, this is a 1985 addition to an old 1925 building that were the old Bloch School. But then there's some 1950s and 2002 yellow blonde brick buildings that are surround. So we painted this fabric of terracotta to tell the story of the place. I think its success is something I'm not quite sure about. But it's you start to see it. This is the west elevation on your right. Oops, sorry. And then just a set of the plans. And again, just seeing how we resolved the spaces all around this kind of very open, generous area that's kind of the heart of the camp, heart of the school, and in some respects has become heart of West Campus. And a view up looking at the oculus, the stair that goes from 2 to 3, and then all of the kind of intentional, collaborative, design-led thinking spaces that range from the auditorium, the primary auditorium, to some lecture-style classrooms, to the finance lab and some other spaces. Just a few more views of how it feels. Oops. We have to do this. Well, there's roof terrace. Oh, there we go. And then one last view of the outside. So the next project is a project, an engineering center. It's a research and office facility for 1,200 engineers. It's in San Diego, California. It's a series. I think I said it's 1,200 buildings, 1,200 engineers in one building. And then there's a smaller building that provides amenity services, food, health services, and training. And I have more photographs. The project just finished, and it's not well photographed, but there's a long bar that's 400 feet long is the main office wing. It faces south. It uses a shading system similar to what we're proposing for the library project on the upper floors. It's open to the garden on the lower floor. It's focused on really trying to help this company. I'm not supposed to say their name. Hope I don't say it there. But really help them position themselves to compete with companies like Apple and Google and some of the, I guess, the more progressive companies in the California area. And so it was a design competition, which we started the process with a lot of sketches and things like you see. But what really helped us win is we recognized, or we kind of caught onto the fact that even though it was the buildings were kind of in this seas of parking lots. It was just one office campus next to another office campus, and it really had kind of destroyed nature. These are in the hills of San Diego, about a mile in from the ocean. Quite beautiful area in its natural setting, but most of that had gone away. And yet we had a canyon immediately, just actually about 300 yards from the center of our property that no one really knew about or no one really took advantage of. And so we really founded our idea on taking our campus to the canyon, bringing the canyon to the campus, and creating a landscape solution that really embodied the plant materials and the attitude towards water, and really thinking more like the natural place and less like the surroundings. And so we had these 5 existing buildings that are not very nice buildings, well, 4 buildings, 1 parking structure. They'd already planned another parking structure that's now in that big green area. And we had these 2 sites. And so the site that we chose for the office building is the site over in the southeast. And then up on the northeast is the location for the amenities building plus a soccer field that's on the north side of it. It's not really fair in San Diego. The weather's so easy, but we still really begin with that idea, in which we pretty quickly figured out that we could do natural ventilation and make it work, even in office environments. And we'd finished a project. We designed the contractor's offices about a mile from here, which operates without without cooling. And so we were pretty confident that we could make it work, but the labs made it a little more complicated, and their energy loads are so high, as you all know, in lab buildings. But still, we began with that, really began with this idea of beauty, nature, people, and really creating a place that was going to attract. And I forgot to say this earlier, this company, their kind of ability to attract the best graduates was they could get to the top 10% in their old ways and their old campus, and we were part of a strategy to move it up to the top 1% to 2%. And so that they had a real reason, a mission for making the switch. I probably should have photographs of their old campus and offices, but again, we had this image up, and actually this image came out of the work on this project. We're really understanding these different spaces, and then understanding how to position the spectrum of spaces throughout the buildings to create an environment that really encouraged collaboration, encouraged engineers to come out of their shells, and to really get to create more good ideas, attract more and better people. We had a lot of different ideas. These are the models that we printed. This is the scheme more or less the scheme that we selected. So it's a research bar with some office, a knuckle that has communal spaces, and then the long office wing on the south side. But which is probably more important is we were creating these really positive outdoor spaces to really take advantage of that incredible climate, which is is more or less not done in a mile in from the coast in office environments in San Diego. And then we conceptualized all the different spaces that it was going to take to create those kinds of environments, both inside and outside. And then there's an example of one of the break rooms. And then here's one of the labs without equipment before it's loaded. We looked at different ways of making people happy in their workplace, and studied how we get natural ventilation to work and shade the glass, and then a little more developed views. This was November. The building was moved into a year ago, and landscapes grow a lot faster in San Diego than they do in Kansas City. Maybe they grow faster. I'm sure they grow faster here, but at any rate, they've grown in quite nicely. And so there's lots of these little moments of these outdoor spaces that they didn't have before. So the ones on the inside the courtyard are more communal and public. These on the south side are more private, more focused. So, and then just a couple more views of how the building feels. So this is a view into that main courtyard up to the primary entrance to the buildings there. We used open outdoor circulation, which again, that was actually, real estate is really, really expensive here, and the cost of land is crazy. The cost of buildings are not as crazy, but the value of the land is just ridiculous. And by putting the circulation on the outside of the building, it didn't count against the zoning. And so we were able to build about 7 or 8% more building, useful building, which helped their real estate pro forma. I mean, they considered that a significant increase. And I don't have photographs of the training. There's a training center up on the top of the South Bar. And, in that case, we did all of the ambulatory spaces, the lobby and all that are all outdoor spaces. So the only thing that are enclosed are the training rooms themselves. So they grow their own food. They work with an urban farmer that is, so the whole campus is populated. It's not enough food for the whole campus, but they grow, it's a fair amount. And then they cook it in the building on the right, and they serve it, and then I think I can make this run. There's a nice little Jenny Holzer piece. You can see it in the... You guys see that? Yeah. So anyway, I'll stop on that project at that. But so now that leads us to the main event. So yeah, we started working on this a little over 2 years ago. Gary Petherick called one day and told me we were shortlisted, and got excited, and then I guess a couple weeks later, a month later, Howard called us into the room and said we were going to get called back in for whatever that's called, a second interview, and Stuart and David and Brian and the rest of us all walked out really happy and excited. And it's been a great project to be associated with, and it's as it says up there, it's it's LP3 and BNIM, and then also Integral Group, and I'm going to mention them because it's really important for everyone to hear. Integral Group's a mechanical engineering firm, has offices all over the U.S. They're based in Oakland, but the office that we began working with was based in Richmond and Virginia and D.C. area. They now have an office in Atlanta and have had for about a year. But Tom Simpson was the primary person with that firm that has worked with us and helped really, as well as working with Newcomb and Boyd and others in the Atlanta area. But it really helped us kind of, I think, create this solution. And I just wanted to say that because it's this idea, no one knows as much as everyone, really working in an integrative way, in a collaborative way with all the people that it takes to design a building. And I probably should also mention that I don't have any slides of their work, but there was a company called Brightspot that was part of it that Amit and the library brought in early on to help to really understand what the 21st century research library was going to be, because it hasn't really been done before. And so really the process has been, I would imagine, has been somewhat unusual for the campus. It's been unusual for us in many respects, but it's really this idea of going into uncharted water and doing something that has to last for a long time into the future, because it's a state campus and a state building and a state program, but also it has to be adaptable, and we'll talk about that, and nimble for the changes in learning and changes in research that come along. Oops. Yeah. So we early on we recognized that Price Gilbert Building is a beautiful building. Paul Heffernan did a great job. It means a lot, and it's probably emotionally even more beautiful to people that have gone to school here in the past and have memories of it. But so we knew we were working with something that we had to be very responsible to, and very sensitive to. we probably didn't feel the same way about Crosland Tower. So we saw that as an opportunity. We saw the Crosland Tower as an opportunity to really give it life in a different way. And I guess I didn't say this, but much of the impetus for this was in terms of the changing pedagogy that was decided for the library, was also was made possible by the decision to move the books. To move the books away, 90% of the books away. And so that was a given when we arrived. And so, we were really, in some ways, some of the hard work had already been done. We were given all the fun work, I think, in some respects. And so, beginning with this incredible asset, and how do we give both it and its neighbor a new life? We take book space, and the Crosland Tower is really designed for storing books. I mean, it's very efficient. The floor-to-floor heights are very low. It was really and it lines up with Crosland Tower or Price Gilbert, where the floor-to-floor heights on the north side are very low. But at any rate, it was really designed to do that. So how do we turn book space into people space? How do we, again, understand that it's already had a long life, but how do we position it to be a loose fit, to be able to adjust and change with the changing needs of students and faculty? How do we take a building that's very much an introverted building and make it extroverted and have it reach out and connect to the campus and the community? How do we turn what we use the word congestion in terms of how the two buildings were connected and that kind of awkward underground passage? How do we transform that into one of a beautiful connection, not just between the buildings, but connecting the buildings to Cherry Street and letting Cherry Street have life and come back through again and check, and connecting the campus in a more positive way and connecting the club? And how do we recognize the past, but yet also recognize the future, and especially the idea that Georgia Tech is a place of where digital technology should be even more present, possibly than a school with a different name. And we, thinking about from the earliest days of library to in 1953, 1968, to the Clough Building a few years ago, to where we are today, and how we really position ourselves both with an understanding of history or legacy, but also thinking about the future. We found the campus had done a really nice job of developing a strategic plan, and from that strategic plan we found these kind of sets of ideas of what a traditional campus is versus what a knowledge-based community is. So really this idea of extroverting not just a building, but extroverting the campus and connecting Georgia Tech to Atlanta and to the greater community, and really trying to get the different silos of the university to work better as teachers, to work better as students. And so the notion that this, in some respects, that the buildings themselves become neutral, as libraries already are, but even stronger neutral ground, so that it brings a place that architecture and engineering and other schools come together naturally, and that the community comes in, much like we mentioned the Bloch project in Kansas City. And so we kind of developed, we've said this word more than once, or this phrase, long life, loose fit, the idea of a scholarly community where scholarship is even more important than it is today in terms of people coming together and being active scholars in the two buildings. And then lastly, that the spaces be inspiring, that they lift up the spirits of the users, of the teachers, of the students. And so we looked at many precedents for how we would do that. I should say both indoors and outdoors, the high line, of how we lift folks up and bring them together in positive ways. We also looked at lots of detail and all kinds of interesting diagrams about what all that means and how we have all the supporting technologies and daylight and all those elements that we could possibly imagine. I like the diagram. I'm not sure if I really ever quite understood it, but and we looked at or discovered that we were, really transforming the space dramatically when we take all those books away. So the stacks were, 46% before 8%. And so the spaces for people, the spaces for collaborative learning really, filled up the building differently than it had been in the past. And so the numbers are pretty interesting. There were 1,250 places for people to sit in the buildings before. In the new building, there will be 23, almost double, 2,360. The other thing that this diagram talks about is Tom Simpson, who I mentioned earlier, has helped us really reduce the energy in the building dramatically. And I'll come to that later, but since it's on this slide, I'll mention it. So we're going from 121 kilobTUs per square foot a year to 47. So it's a dramatic change in how much energy the building's going to use. These are some very early sketches that and I found them by accident. I'll tell you all this. My presentation crashed early this morning. I had to rebuild it completely on the plane ride down here today, and then at Stuart's office. And so I found these drawings by accident. I'd forgotten all about them. And Stuart and Brian and I were looking at it like, oh my gosh. But anyway, so these were the early sketches of what we were trying to accomplish, of how these, how we take these low ceiling areas of Crosland Tower or similar spaces in Price Gilbert, and how we open them up. We create these more generous spaces, more inspirational spaces for connecting people together, for connecting people with knowledge, different ways of doing that. Maybe we create an amphitheater in the base of Crosland Tower along Bobby Dodd, and we'll come back to that later, of how we, really create stronger connections from Crosland Tower out to South Plaza, the Plaza, Bobby Dodd Plaza. The idea that maybe we occupy the roof of Crosland Tower with some wonderful spaces, or how we connect to nature and really let the buildings burst out and have stronger connections to the Grove and the surroundings. And this was in Crosland, this is in Price Gilbert, same idea. Food's not here anymore, but still. And then, how we really honor and respect the wonderful, glorious spaces of the reading rooms in Price Gilbert. And we also found the landscape master plan that Nelson Bird Boltz did. And this really beautiful drawing, this really beautiful idea that the campus is made up of humans, made up of nature, but it's also made up of the man-made, of the designed landscape and the fabricated landscape and buildings. We actually brought this to the interview, and this importance of connecting people to nature for elevating learning, and how we do that through the design of the buildings. I go outside every single day, first thing in the morning, and if I'm including when I have early flights, if I don't do that, I know my performance is going to be down. And so with those ideas, we started thinking about, well, what are the opportunities? How do we can connect. Sorry about this drawing's kind of wild, but so here's Price Gilbert, here's Crosland, but we connect to the Grove, connect to Bobby Dodd Plaza, occupy the rooftops, much like has already happened at Clough. And so, we started exploring those ideas, and well, this one suggests occupying Price Gilbert. We didn't end up doing that, but we explored all those ideas, and some of this was also driven by Stuart's studio students. There were two studios that did a intercession class, I guess, right after we were selected, and they shared some of their ideas about nature and about connecting to the outdoors. And so one of the drawings that I think really drove the design, one of the ideas, is we realized that the Clough is active at the lower floors, that if we started to carry that activity and that noise and that vibrancy all the way across over to Bobby Dodd, the alley that's on the east side of Bobby Dodd, and then let the building become quieter as it goes up, that it really opened up the door for what became this passage that just almost like, I think Steve Swank called it the highway, that ran across the Grove level, went straight into Clough and really connected all these spaces. and that became kind of in a way, the heart of the building. And then thinking about how we continue that connectivity of opening up Cherry Street and really leveraging Bobby Dodd and thinking about the population flowing through, and letting Cherry Street really open up and connect and become a connective tissue and strengthen what used to be, but also really create a new vision of connecting the North Campus, which today is, a much more significant part of campus than it was when these buildings were, when Heffernan sited these first building in the 50s. And so this diagram is just kind of carrying on that notion. So when we started looking carefully at Crosland Tower, as y'all probably recall, that there are just these little moments of glass up through at the kind of where the masses return, which don't do a good job of creating spaces for people. So we really started looking at different strategies of the north only, reglazing the north and the south, doing an all-glass building. We came back to something like this, not exactly that, but something more like that. But there was a kind of a constant study in terms of how we were trying to figure out the best strategy for changing the building. We looked at a number of different ideas, the glass building, the nighttime view of that, the Stewart sketch, different ways of opening up the south, and then which led us to the design that I'd like to now walk us through. So this is a north view, walking up Cherry Street, walking up the hill. You see a new bridge that connects the two buildings. The original profile and clarity of the glass of Price Gilbert has been restored. The window wall was replaced 25 or 30 years ago with a less elegant, didn't really match the original profiles or the mullion spacing and things like that, nor the glass, the performative qualities of the glass. And so we've come back with a very clear glass, high performance. I can't remember the name of it, but at any rate, it's as close as we can get to what was originally there, single glaze. But yet it's very, very well performing. It has this low iron glass that doesn't change the color of the light. You really get a natural light that comes through it. And we've kind of carried that same strategy over light quality into a newly glazed north wall of Crosland Tower, and then a new bridge that we'll come back to later that's indoor space on levels 4 and 3, and then an open air bridge on level 2. A little closer view, start to see that transparency. There's vertical mullions on the north side to catch the late afternoon, early morning sun to knock that down so that we're really creating an environment that's as glare-free as possible so that people can be up close to the glass. And I should also say that the glass we're using, we paid a lot of attention to it so that it has an insulating quality and a radiant quality that allows people to be up close to it. So even I know that wintertime coolness is not as much of an issue here as it is in some parts of the world, but we really paid a lot of attention to that to make the space as useful and comfortable as it could be. And then a view coming up from Bobby Dodd, like from the freshman student housing. You're walking up and a new entrance, and that becomes kind of that Grove level highway entrance that goes through the building and passes all the way back to Clough. And the view of it, I think it's actually the final design. I probably should mention it. So we're using a cement board to clad all of the concrete frames and so on. And then the brick stays more or less as is. We're not insulating it. We studied it. It just didn't make sense economically. but a new shading system and glass on the south. And you see that auditorium, that amphitheater that looks in. There's sci-fi up, and then archives beyond on the level 1 beyond. And then a view from the west. Again, looking up the hill, getting closer. You start to see at the top, well, first of all, you see the entryway right off of the Bobby Dodd Plaza into level 1. And then at the top, you'll see a porch. There's a pair of those, one on the north, both on the south side, on each side of a central bay. And then on the north side, you can see there's a structure up there that houses a new reading room or multi-purpose room. And then that bridge that kind of connects through, and with the idea that it will embody and will be an armature for digital media. That we'll try to come back to that in just a second. But, oops. And then as we pushed out a little bit of the building on the Grove level, and which allowed us to have this nice little terrace right on the north side of Crosland Tower, which of course looks back at the architecture buildings, and then also, you can't see it in the sketch, but really has a beautiful view back towards the Grove. And then we're going to go inside now for a second. And so the process of working with Brightspot, working with the library, really started to define all these different activities and types of spaces and quality of space that were desirable for creating this, library of the 21st, research library of the 21st century, that's inspirational, that brings scholars together, that has long life, loose fit. And so we'll kind of walk up. So every floor has been completely transformed, and the building's been reconfigured in a great way, from the mechanical down at the lowest level to how we start to use the Grove level. And oops, this thing is going too fast. So the Grove level, and then moving up through the building to level 1. So this is archives reading room. This is sci-fi. This is the big, reuse of the big reading room. The Scholars Event Network over in the upper right-hand corner. Moving up to level 2, and I'm not going to do everything, but the Viz Lab and Multimedia Zone are in Crosland Tower. And then with faculty space, we've introduced a 3-story volume to really emulate the 2-story volumes that are in Price Gilbert to give relief and generosity to Crosland Tower. Moving on up, more faculty space, graduate space, and then a reading room that occupies the 7th floor. A multi-purpose space that is less formal than a traditional meeting room, but probably using the wrong term. I guess we are still calling it a reading room. And then solar panels that cover the top. And so again, I kind of jumped ahead on that, but this idea of really borrowing the 2-story volume Price Gilbert and looking for opportunities. And so we found a few of those in doing that into Crosland Tower. So there's some nice sections that start to show you. So here we are at Price Gilbert, and then here we are. So there's over on Bobby Dodd, the 3-story space I just mentioned, and then the reading room, 2-story reading room at the Grove level of Crosland Tower, and then the space upstairs. And then this is looking north through the buildings. So the Scholars Event Network, the entry space from level 1 down to Grove in Price Gilbert, which is a new opening in the floor, and I'll share that in a second. And then this reading room, and then the 3-story space, and then the reading room. So a series of views of walking in. So one of the ideas that we're working with on projected media, looking back towards into Price Gilbert, into the exhibit space, the kind of renovated reading room, We have to, for building code reasons, we have to add a little glass on the guardrails. This is Scholars Event Network, 2-story space over by the old entryway, the original entryway. I guess I didn't say it, the rotunda's gone, the light fixture's gone. And then coming in at the north entrance from the Grove and the view of that media, we've kind of cut this, shaped this floor opening to make it as generous as possible, but also to be as modest, I guess, at the same time. Sorry. Looking back towards the new food service, which is is underneath the stairway or underneath that bridge connection, so it's right at kind of the nexus of the two buildings. Another view of that. And then looking up into the sci-fi reading room from below. I guess I didn't say this. This is kind of the very west end of that Grove level reading room at Crossland Tower. And oops, sorry. And then we're walking over, so now we're back in Price Gilbert. And this is along the north edge of the glass in Price Gilbert. So this is what's called the store. So this is what replaces a traditional desk in a library. This is where you go for help, for guidance, to pick up things. If you've reserved an iPad or a camera or something like that, you'd come here to get it. Or you'd get expert consultation. You'd come there to meet with an expert in some area who would help you with your paper or with whatever it is that you might need. So the diagram it's that space that's up, all along the north edge of Price Gilbert. So it's anchored on the east side by the entryway, and then on the west side by the connection to Clough. And another view of that. Oops. And we have rovers and student faculty. So people it's kind of like an Apple Store approach is one of the ideas. And I think all that model in the libraries to be given a lot of credit, because they've been mocking things up and testing things all through the design process and working very closely, particularly with Stuart and Brian on all this. And then the views of that reading room, the amphitheater, the sci-fi, another view of sci-fi. Oops. And then some workspace upstairs, that 3-story volume. We have a funny name for it, and I can't remember the name of it. But, and then all the way up on the 7th floor, views of the deck looking out. Another view. And then quickly, I just want to share a little bit. So we've really, I think, in some respects, the materiality approach is really trying to honor the original materials, the plaster, the colors that were in the building in 1950 in Price Gilbert when it was built, the cork flooring, but a new strategy that, and in the same ways, when Crosland has the marble, unfilled marble walls around the elevator core, which we have a little idea about how we're approaching that. But so I've got just 2 floors here, but so this is first floor, so the reading room up at the top. And we're really, we're just letting cork kind of flow everywhere, somewhat very similar to what it used to be. And then, oops. And then upstairs, we've switched to carpet for acoustic reasons, for cost reasons, for a lot of reasons. But it's still this very simple palette, much like was here in the first place. It's very much intended to be a background for the activities of life, of vitality that's going on inside the buildings. And there's a series of, so we started looking at the core of Crosland Tower, where the marble is located, and where other things are located, and we're moving the elevator doors, and there's a lot of things that are moving the elevators and things like that. And so we realized that we could either try to patch it, or we could try to or just remove it and salvage it. But instead, we took an approach of studying each of the 4 facades, and so we're really looking at seeing what's available, what's there today and what's not there today, and then different strategies of how we could reuse in some cases and move the stone from the travertine from one place to another. There was no stone above the ceiling line, so we're filling in. And so the idea is that we're honoring what was there in the first place, but we're coming back and adjusting it and shifting it, trying to use as minimal approach as possible to both recall the past, but also kind of insert a new vision for the future. And there's our final solution. And so that is just about it. And so we're back to this idea of layers of all the different strategies that we incorporated, which led us to working with the climate. And then this diagram came from one of the environmental charrettes, or the sustainability charrettes at the beginning of the project, and where we kind of had this aha moment. We discovered that when the highest, we started tracking when the library was used, which is primarily running up to finals, and then it falls off, and running up to finals. And we started looking at what the blue line really represents, the summertime cooling load. And we found out that if we had just used traditional design techniques, we would have designed the building for the wrong demand. And so Integral went through and really mapped the uses, because the library has incredible information on gate count, on daily activity, of how many people come and go and all that. So we really refined the mechanical requirements for the building. Oops, that wasn't supposed to be here. We also looked at how the systems approach. So while the engineers were studying the systems and demand, the architects were looking at how we can modify the envelope, knowing that we were going to leave the east and west walls uninsulated, but really creating high-performance solutions for all the different aspects of the building. And shading the glass in some cases, there it says what it is up there, and not shading in other places, but using a frit. And part of the reason for that was to kind of create these peekaboo moments on the poke outs, so that you could look down Bobby Dodd or whatever, but have these kind of nice captured views. And how we really put the building back together again. And so we're really, it's not a great envelope today, but we're really turning it into a great high-performance envelope, which, working in concert with the mechanical engineers and electrical engineers, is allowing us to create a daylighting solution that's really effective, that really works. It's very predictable. We know where we need, how to control glare, how to really create environments that are going to be comfortable to be in a pretty tough footprint. And I'm not going to try to be the engineer, but we use a number of different systems, from a traditional underfloor to chill beams to VAV, and in all cases we're using an independent outside dedicated air system, recovery system, so that we're minimizing how much cooling and heating we're doing by running the system, as well as dehumidification in that way. And so you start to see Tom's diagrams in terms of how we're pushing energy use down through the building, and how he's zoned the building and using those different systems throughout the two buildings to create the most comfortable and efficient system possible. And at the end of the day, we see, we've also helped convince the university to upgrade the central plant, and so there's about a 40% increase in efficiency through that. And then at the end of the day, we end up pushing our total use down to 47.5 kilo BTUs per square foot a year, which is it's a great performance for a building where we kept 50%, more than 50% of the envelope as it is. And we're doubling the population of the building through that process. And again, so his story on when that energy is being used and how it's going down, and so this, hopefully you can read this, but so what this is saying is that as we've made the building more efficient, we've at 1,200 people or 1,300 people, it was 96.8 kilo BTUs per person. At the end, when we've doubled the population and increased the efficiency by almost 50%, we're down to 19.3. So it's I think a pretty remarkable, pretty telling story for how integrated design and collaboration can work. And we're then, of that energy, we're catching about 22% of it on the roof as part of through the PV system, and about 9% on Crosland. I think. So the water story is pretty nice too. So there's already, the campus has already had a great water history in terms of creating the campus, the tech green. And so we're sending our wastewater, all of our gray water and stormwater to tech green. And we're able to, in doing that, we're cutting the water use in half. But more importantly, we're cutting the amount of wastewater that goes to the combined storm and sanitary system of Atlanta, of the city system. We're cutting that by 90%, which is pretty remarkable given kind of the things we didn't do. And so I have one more thing about the media arts, and I'm going to, if you will, bear with me, I'm going to try to run a little video. Oh my. Oh, there it is. Moved. Damn it. This is hot off the press. It's outside the scope of the main project, but it's something that the campus has been very interested in developing, and we've been working on for quite a while. And we've actually been, at the same time, by doing this process, we realized how important it was to really make that curtain wall as transparent and elegant and beautiful as possible to create a neutral background. And so we've this process has really been beneficial to doing that. So thank you. Oh yeah, whatever.
So were there any questions?
You mentioned adaptation, usually with spatial needs of individuals occupying the building. What place does adaptation have in the development of sustainable technology? How do you design a building to adapt to the changes?
Well, the question was about adaptability, and so the term we use often is long life, loose fit to describe that. And but it comes in the part of making decisions about the design of the building that are easier to, for instance, a mechanical system is easier to change in the future. A floor system, if we use underfloor displacement air, which, are you familiar with that? It's a way of putting the cabling and the air and the cooling air and the heating air and all of that below a floor system that can be lifted away and have very easy access to it. And if that's like if we do that, the building's automatically easier to adapt in the future. If we use movable wall systems and movable doors and things like that for partitions on the inside, it's easier to do that. If we use lighting systems, it's easier to plug in, and rather than having to bring an electrician in you always have to bring an electrician in, but for the same amount of intensity. But there are a number of ways to do that. But there's also the kind of fundamental planning decisions that we try to keep things off the glass. We try to, because it takes more energy and more investment in the mechanical systems and to keep people comfortable close to the glass, unless you're in a super benign climate. But even in San Diego, we still practice that because there are times when the glass overheats. And so it's making, and when you don't invest on the edges of the buildings to do that, when you create a more uniform system on the inside of the building or for the main body of the building, it actually it allows the building to be adjusted and shifted more easily. We try to build everything do at least two things. So we make spaces more flexible, more adaptable, and not customized to the extent that maybe we have in the past. There's sometimes that just doesn't work, so you have to meet it. But it's a way of thinking, a way of planning for change in the future.
You mentioned daylighting and circadian rhythms and the effects of daylighting on day-to-day human life. I'm wondering what other sort of research-based or evidence-based moves were done for the library, like the placement of study areas in relationship to pathways and hallways, and visual exposure versus like visual access and voyeurism, and how those things were optimally placed or more successfully placed together.
It's a great question, and I mean I think I'm not sure it was actively thought that. I mean, I'm not sure that we had the conversation in the same way that you described it, but I think that was very much a part of everything that is of the design process. For instance, the store. There's a lot of concern about how one enters the store and how to prevent distractions, and the fact that it was located next to Clough and next to what is considered a fairly loud and probably interrupted space, there was a fair amount of concern, and so we actually closed that area off more probably at the end of the day along that edge for that reason. And we inverted or turned the rooms to try to reduce that chance for informal interruption. I think the placement of the graduate student study area, of really giving them a place that was far away, and I probably didn't point that out from the rest of the population. But I think it was more informal than formal in the way that you described it. So.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So after this pretty extensive thinking exercise, what's the library in the 21st century? Can you give us maybe some sort of, well, let me back up and say, the library used to be the storehouse of knowledge, the sort of organization of knowledge. What is the library?
It's probably more the marketplace of knowledge. It's a place for peer-to-peer learning. It's a place for collaborative learning. It's a place for serendipity. You still go there for formal exposure, formal interaction with knowledge, but it's also a place that where we're again bringing students together from either from their school or from other schools and creating opportunities for learning from others. It's a different series. It's more collaborative learning experiences than the library certainly had in the past, and then probably more collaborative than hopefully more. Well, I think the goal is it's more collaborative than you're currently seeing in other parts of the campus, so that it sets the stage for that. I think hopefully it's the design thinking has a role. That it's about problem solving and understanding how to apply that knowledge in a way to address the contemporary needs of society and learning. So it started with the ideas of makers, kind of hardcore maker spaces and things like that, and those kind of pulled away for a variety of reasons. But I think it is just really trying to meet people where they are in terms of learning experiences and needs. Using digital media in much more aggressive ways, using technology in much more aggressive ways. So.
somewhat following up on Tristan's question, I think it is really great to see the library becoming so much more collaborative and clearly a lot of focus on that. But so many of those interactions aren't captured. They're very ephemeral. And I'm wondering if there are any other ways in which, in many ways, some of the most exciting sort of celebration of geek culture is the under the ceiling with the digital projections. Do you think there are opportunities to further kind of enhance and celebrate geek culture in the next library?
Geek culture. I think that, that the geek culture was never part of our conversation, I don't think. Maybe Amit could address that, but yes, I think so. I mean, I think I think one of the things is the time frame for this project is it doesn't open until, Gary, I can't remember, quite a while. And so the part of our hesitancy, in fact, is how do we really incorporate the right, what's the balance? Do we create this neutral canvas, if you will, environment, it's almost like a black box theater, but do we create that and let the technology come in as it will, or do we try to insert it into the building and knowing that whatever we do today is going to be wrong in the future? And so I think it's again, the Apple Store and the Microsoft Store and things like that have been used as references. Museums, the director of our museum in Kansas City, the art museum, Julian Zagosio, he really wants to see this because he thinks this project is about what his museum is about. I mean, he thinks the future of this project is about the future of the museum. And so I think it's not so much, it's not just being in there, it's also how does that technology, or how does the geek, if you will, how does that go, is the library a launching pad for going to places all across the globe? And I think that's very much part of the idea, and I probably should have said that earlier. And I appreciate actually your comment, or both questions, because I realized they didn't really say what the library of the future is meant to be. And I apologize for that. That's so.
Showed a great library.
So.
I just have one question, and it's kind of zooming out a little bit. I mean, the library, the improvements are going to be amazing, so it's very exciting, I think, for everybody to see that. But I'm curious in all your work about the dialogue between, I mean, you clearly integrate systems, performance-based drivers into your work in a kind of seamless way. I'm curious about the dialogue that goes on during the design process between, concerns that you have about scale, use, materials, all those things, and the kind of performance-based drivers. Like what that dialogue is and what kind of process you have in play where you kind of negotiate, and because ultimately it has to be some kind of game of trade-offs at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's trade-offs in a lot of ways. It's trade-offs in this building, in these buildings. There were just severe spatial limitations to what we were doing, and there were, in some respect, and there was money limitations, like all projects, and so there's constantly the money one is the one that's maybe you're kind of addressing more, but we kind of have this opinion that there's never more money. So there's always a dance going on. There's always trade-offs. But working with Tom Simpson, and he's not the only great engineer that we work with in that regard. But Tom came to the interview, and in fact the PDC, they were confused. They didn't know if he was an architect or an engineer, because the dialogue. We started that dialogue before we even really were awarded the project of thinking about different ways of solving the problem, of understanding that. To get the best glass that we could get, we had to prove it to the campus that it had value, and that to get that clear glass, to get the glass that was going to give back the spirit of the building on especially the north side, that we had to prove that value both in energy and comfort. And so it is a constant dialogue. I don't know, I can't remember not ever being that way. I mean, ever having that kind of constant working with people like that. And so it's hard to answer your question in some respects. But in a way, you work together to prove. For instance, when the central plan issue, I think the campus was thinking about it, but when we started showing them the impact it could have, they just came about because of this. Everybody was working together. We were working with the engineers here, the campus engineers. And I can't say anything. I mean, I don't know. In some ways, I don't know how to answer your question.
No, that was a good answer. Any more questions? Okay, one more.
What is the reasoning behind getting rid of the rotunda, the original entrance to the library?
What is the reasoning for getting rid of the rotunda? I mean, I think there were a lot of reasons. One is that architecturally, I think we just felt it was the wrong thing for the building. It got in the way in a lot of different ways. It got in the way of the plaza, the open space, and we clearly had a strong feeling or commitment to making strong connections between the buildings and outdoors, and the rotunda just did not help that. Its architecture was inconsistent with the other two buildings, and we knew we were trying to honor Price Gilbert in this respectful and energetic way we could. It's not the world's greatest building, I think, is what Howard told me one time since he's not here, but it's a really beautiful building, and it has a huge history, and so we were trying to give it back as much life as we could. I didn't go into it, but we didn't immediately choose to put the entry where we put it. We looked at other entry proposals that also, I think all of them always required getting rid, or we always came back to getting rid of removing the rotunda, because it wasn't, if you look, especially if you go back and look at Heffernan's or his planning studies for why he chose that site, and the president allowed him to choose the site in 1951, I think, is when he started, or 49, I can't remember. But the reasons he chose it and what he was trying to accomplish, he was actually trying to put books up on the plateau, up on the edge of the hillside there, in a way that, and before, he imagined that there would never be a Crosland Tower, but the books would be almost like an Acropolis. I mean, we're going to really be held up, or the library was going to be held up. And he had many other designs. This was only one it was the one that was affordable. The others were more grand. But still, I think the rotunda just got in the way. I mean, it really took away from that, and especially when you look at, Clough had kind of crowded it a little bit, and Crosland had crowded it. And so I think we felt that, if we were going to really connect to the campus, and, this whole idea of letting the knowledge out of the library and letting the campus into the library was I probably didn't say that very well earlier, but that was, what we were striving to do. So, yeah.
Okay, good. Well, Steve, thank you again.
Thank you.
Great.